Well, let's go to our next discussion. As part of measures to diversify the economy and generate more revenue to fund government infrastructural projects, public enterprises were established to enable the state participate in high profit potential ventures in order to earn more money for further development purposes. Despite the full operationalization of these enterprises, such as the Nigerian Railway Corporation, Water Board, Port Authority, amongst others, revenue accruable to government or coffers keeps declining as a result of inefficient management, corruption, and poor customer service delivery, causing a strain in their contribution to overall economic growth. Latest data from budget shows that the state-owned enterprises generate billions of naira between 2017 and 2022, but these agencies keep lurking in the face of fiscal shocks and other challenges and have shrunk fax distributable revenues. Well, joining me via Zoom is a senior researcher at Budget Foundation, Lagos, Valia Kwaga. Thank you so much for your time. It's good to see you.
Hi, Tolu. Thanks for having me.
Yes, first, I'm going to start with the establishment of this state-owned enterprises. What really were they established for, and how well have they been performing before now?
I mean, state-owned enterprises, as the name implies, are enterprises that the government manages in specific critical areas like petroleum, like telecoms, like mineral resources, and even in some instances, ports and what have you. So you get a sense that there is a specific type of service, there's a commodity, there's a value chain that the government thinks it is in the best position to control and to administer and to sort of organize as a market player. Several countries around the world have set up state-owned enterprises, more often in terms of managing oil resources and other extractive commodities. But by and large, you also see them operating in energy and in telecommunications more often than not. So you could say that globally, state-owned enterprises have gone through several transitions. Countries around the world have seen that statist approach to covering all the bases, as it were, and keeping these energy extractive industries close to the chest may distort the market and might even make the acquisition of these properties or the sale of these goods or the provisions of these services very difficult. And they then, privatize these firms. So, history is replete with instances where states have decided to, release these things to the market. For Nigeria, we've been experiencing a level of unbundling, as it were, as you look at the energy supply industry, you look at telecoms, and now you look at petroleum that are being privatized, which means that the government sees that some of these agencies, at least for some of these state-owned enterprises, the critical ones, should be left to the market to operate and to administer. So the performance really has been mixed, but I think by and large, it looks like a lot of attention is being given to the market as the best arbiter for the management of these resources.
Now, interestingly, we have a budget deficit of above 6 trillion naira. A lot of issues around revenue. Why is it that is at this time we are looking at what the state-owned enterprises are generating? What were we doing before now? What have they been doing before now to support government? In your assessments and your data, what did you see? Tell us some about this.
So the issue really is the government or the Nigerian state has for a while depended on revenues from the sale of crude oil. And of course, this has its inherent challenges because there are shocks, there are production problems, there's vandalization, and the international scene has a great deal of effect on how oil is produced and how oil is sold. So the government, of course, would ask itself, what is the best way to sell these products? What is the best way to operate on the international market, knowing that revenue will always be an issue? So you see, within the past years that we've been studying the data, there has been a fall in revenue. And state-owned enterprises, that range from those in telecoms to energy to the extractive industry, are meant to produce or are meant to provide a level of revenue to consolidated revenue. That's the revenue of the federation. And the projections have been put out, and Nigeria has really been falling in its revenue projections. Within the past 7-8 years, all our revenue projections have fallen by at least 1 trillion, 2-3 trillion naira. So something definitely is wrong. The problem is with the governance, because without adequate transparency, without adequate accountability, without an improvement in the capacity of these state-owned enterprises, they certainly would not be able to bring the revenue that would be able to bridge the gap in the revenue deficits that we have in the nation, which is why you see a lot of the scramble has been more towards borrowing as a term or as a means to plug those short-term revenue deficits. Meanwhile, the problems will continue to persist if the governance of these institutions are not improved. As good as the efforts of the Fiscal Responsibility Commission have been in not only alerting the government to these deficits and to these revenue shortfalls that should be filled by revenue from the state-owned enterprises, there really is much more that the executive needs to do. And to be fair, there really has been, in the past 1 or 2 years, some substantial level of improvement, especially in terms of the budget landscape and the circulars and the administration from the budget office of the Federation. But there really is a lot more room for improvement. They say it's the largest room in the world. There's a lot more room for improvements, especially in the way that state-owned enterprises, make their budgets public, make their revenues public, and actually adhere to the highest principles of transparency and probity to the federal government.
Let's move further to plugging all forms of leakages so that at least there will be more accountability and, of course, transparency, which is what you're talking about. And that's been your position in all of this. Now, what more can be done, or what advice are you giving government at this time? Of course, I also look at some of these entities and I see that, yes, if properly managed, we can get, well, at least a lot of funds, one way or the other, to support government, particularly at this time where revenue continues to dwindle. So what more can be done to promote accountability and transparency in all forms of transactions in all of this government-owned enterprises?
I mean, that's a great question. I'm really going to say a lot of things that are, in the public domain. A lot of organizations have carried out research, very detailed research on these issues. And government agencies, especially the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, have really spearheaded a lot of efforts regarding how to improve the governance profile. Specifically, one point or one of the quickest wins is for the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the Commission to undergo an amendment and for the Commission to be empowered. Now, the Commission is directly under the presidency and is meant to monitor, among other things, the activities of these state-owned enterprises. But many a times they have been prevented because state-owned enterprises and the leadership of some of these organizations simply refuse to either remit documentation or to provide, accurate data on the revenue that they have been able to gather for that particular fiscal year. I mean, the Fiscal Responsibility Commission has been able to see the remittance of at least 2 billion naira, if I'm not mistaken, in a very recent fiscal year. And this was a huge jump from the hundreds of millions in the past. So, speaking with the commission and reading through their documentation, budget has seen that there is a lot of good work that can be done. As a matter of fact, the commission has tried to make moves towards the amendment of their act to empower them to really be able to investigate and to present this information and hold these state-owned enterprises to account and mandate them to produce this revenue information. But they will still need additional input from offices like the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation and the Senate committees on finance, specifically for the ones that provide oversight for these state-owned enterprises. Another means is through the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance. Now, because a lot of these state-owned enterprises are privatized or have some level of private shareholding, there is a lot of discretion that they are left with in the presentation of their fiscal data. And by fiscal data, of course, I mean budgets, I mean fiscal projections, I mean revenue. And granting them this discretion makes it difficult for the government to truly know what agency or what state-owned enterprise is bringing in what amount of money. To further complicate the issue, some of these state-owned enterprises are partially funded by the government, others are fully funded by the government, while some are not funded by the government at all. So there seems to be different regimes governing these different categorizations of state-owned enterprises. And until there is some level of harmonization or a rule of equal applicability to the state-owned enterprises, it will continue to be a cat and mouse game between regulators and the state-owned enterprises themselves. Of course, there's also the issue of legislative oversight. And, the senators do have some level of influence and can improve the governance by demanding that the agencies that they oversee, stand before them and make presentations on the revenue that they may or may not have been able to gather during the fiscal year. But oftentimes we do not really hear of these things happening. So there's a deficit from the National Assembly in terms of bringing and calling these state-owned enterprises to account. The Budget Office in particular in the recent years has been doing some fantastic work in harmonization of the administration of the budgets and revenue projections and basically fiscal data of state-owned enterprises through their budget implementation monitoring BIMs. I can't really recall the full meaning of the acronym, but they have done some pretty detailed work in making sure that the state-owned enterprises at least understand what they're meant to remit, what they're meant to present. But of course, the problem still becomes one of holding them to account and mandating these state-owned enterprises to actually put this information forward. I think finally, one way that the accountability can be improved is, for civil society and for citizens to develop interest in the way these agencies are being run, especially in creating platforms for public hearings with the National Assembly. Yes, there is a deficit in terms of the legislature calling these agencies to account. Once this process can commence, citizens need to be involved. They need to demand that they be involved because ultimately the Nigerian citizenry are the stakeholders of these state-owned enterprises. There are several global best practices that state-owned enterprises in Nigeria can adhere to that actually would make a lot of the publishing of their information very easy and straightforward. Budget has done a little bit of work in that regard. So, it ranges from the immediate to the long term, but it's hoped that in the coming months, in the coming years, with the type of institutional energy that is being put into transparency by the Budget Office, by the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, there should be some improvement in that regard.
Yeah, finally, before I'll let you go, putting together this report, tell us a bit, in 2 minutes, access to budget figures from all of these government agencies or state-owned agencies to the expenditure and all of that. How easy was it getting some of these figures out?
I'm going to be completely honest with you. It was an uphill task. We selected about 16, 17 state-owned enterprises at random, and of course, we communicated with them officially, and the response rate was 15, 20% at the most. I will say that the most responsive state-owned enterprise has actually been the Nigerian Electricity Liability Management Company, NELMCO, in publishing information and engaging with budget as an organization. Galaxy Backbone, has been in communication, but we've had a bit of difficulty in really coming to a consensus, but they also have made some considerable efforts, Galaxy Backbone PLC. But really, NELMCO has been the most engaging. And, we have actually received some information on their budgets and their utilization of revenue. And budget will publish this information in the coming weeks. And I think this really speaks to the role of leadership and how one person in one institution can really make a difference and can really show or act as a peer for other organizations or for other enterprises, to look onto and to possibly emulate. Yes, the information is very valuable, but if it's not being made public, then there's no way that critical stakeholder, the public, the civil society organizations, can really engage with. If these documents, if these reports, if these projections are not made public, it really erodes the quality of governance. And civil society is very vocal about letting the federal government understand that there's a betterment of institutional quality. There's a betterment of governance that really can come without so much effort, by really just publishing this information and by engaging with citizens, listening to their concerns, responding to them, and engaging with them in general. So by and large, that has been budget's experience so far.
Bayala Kwaga, thank you so much for your time, senior researcher, Budget Foundation, Lagos. I appreciate your time. I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you for having me, Tolu.